Now, on the 20th century, the Persian Gulf War. August 2nd, 1990. The military forces of Iraq storm into Kuwait and bring that tiny country under the iron grip of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. U.S. and allied forces rout the Iraqis and liberate Kuwait in the most one-sided war of modern times. Yet it ended with a puzzling suddenness that left aggressor Saddam Hussein still in power. I'm Mike Wallace, and this is the 20th century. Belligerence was nothing new for Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. Even before the summer of 1990, other countries in the Middle East had become wary of his blustering, his threats. Threats he could back up with the world's fourth largest standing army. But even those who feared Iraq's powerful army and knew Saddam to be callous and ruthless were dumbfounded by his decision to invade Kuwait, the small domain ruled by his fellow Arabs.
The Bush administration believed that Saddam Hussein was bluffing. And today, to most of the world's surprise, including the Kuwaitis, Saddam Hussein turned out to be no bluffer.
President Saddam Hussein wanted Kuwait, and tonight the country is completely his. It was all over in only a matter of hours. 100,000 Iraqi troops and some 300 tanks swept across the Kuwaiti border early this morning that met only localized resistance as they took the capital.
The Iraqi invasion followed 2 weeks of tension in which Iraq massed troops on the border while accusing Kuwait of stealing oil and driving down its price.
In just one day, almost all of the 100,000 Iraqi invaders had moved beyond the capital of Kuwait City to the border of the world's #1 oil producer, Saudi Arabia. The United States was stunned.
President Bush has decided on a cautious policy. He's moving characteristically slowly, trying to organize worldwide sanctions and, if possible, universal condemnation of what he calls Iraq's illegal, naked aggression.
The UN moved with uncharacteristic haste to go on record opposing the invasion.
Rousted from their beds in the early hours of the morning, members of the UN Security Council heard Iraq's explanation for the invasion, then unanimously condemned it.
At my direction, elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, as well as key units of the United States Air Force, are arriving today to take up defensive positions in Saudi Arabia.
Hours ago, President Bush committed America's honor, thousands of its best combat troops and hundreds of warplanes to defense of the wealthy kingdom. President Bush's message to Saddam Hussein could not be clearer and is twofold. 1, get out of Kuwait. 2, you cross into Saudi Arabia and you pay the price.
The aircraft carrier Saratoga got underway this morning from Florida. And although there is no official word it is bound for the Persian Gulf, the families seem to know full well what was happening.
I just said, goodbye, Daddy, I love you, and I just pray he'll come back well and healthy.
What had turned Saddam's invasion into something more than a regional border dispute was oil.
Our country now imports nearly half the oil it consumes and could face a major threat to its economic independence. Much of the world is even more dependent upon imported oil and is even more vulnerable to Iraqi threats.
Under the command of General Norman Schwarzkopf, Operation Desert Shield, as it was called, had moved almost 250,000 U.S. troops to the Persian Gulf by the beginning of November. A diverse group of other countries, ranging from traditional allies like Britain and France to old foes like Syria, sent units to assist the Americans. The more troops he had in the field, the tougher the talk from George Bush.
Iraq must withdraw from Kuwait completely, immediately, and without condition.
Saddam brazenly responded by annexing Kuwait. He ordered foreign embassies there moved to Baghdad. When the U.S. embassy refused to move, Iraq cut off their access to the outside world. U.S. diplomats inside survived on tins of tuna and water from the swimming pool.
We're doing all right so far. So far, so good. Every day, one at a time.
Early in November, Bush raised the stakes for Saddam.
In a striking new escalation of America's intentions and capabilities, the president today committed enough new U.S. forces to drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait.
Saddam countered with another card of his own, the thousands of Westerners stranded in Iraq and Kuwait. He called them guests, but he threatened to use them as human shields at military facilities to discourage Allied bombing attacks.
Mr. President, respectfully, a hostage is a hostage is a hostage. I have to believe that you, an intelligent person, knows that these people are hostages.
If that is how you conceive the situation to be, then how come that the United States kept or retained thousands of Japanese during the Second World War? We're doing this for peace, which is a much more sublime objective than internal security.
Among the more interesting things about the interview was what Saddam Hussein didn't say on camera. As he walked with me through the halls of the presidential palace, he said, "You Americans lack the resolve to go to war." He thought we could never again stand the sight of Americans coming home in body bags.
Nevertheless, the massive U.S. military buildup continued.
The 1st Infantry Division from Fort Riley, Kansas is already beginning to move out, one of 3 additional Army divisions being sent to Saudi Arabia.
Saddam promised what he called the mother of all battles if U.S. forces sought to push the Iraqis out of Kuwait. But it didn't work.
2 tank divisions plus some smaller tank units will come out of Germany, an increase of nearly 1,000 tanks.
And Saddam's hostages failed to deter the U.S. and its allies. Saddam finally let all the hostages go home before the end of the year. With the buildup complete, the question was what, if anything, would happen next.
Everybody spent the holidays standing around waiting. It's the same way they've spent the 100 other days they've been in this strange place, waiting. Today, at least, some of the waiting was in line for hot food, but it didn't really feel like Thanksgiving.
Will those in favor of the draft...
Finally, though, the UN Security Council late in November passed a resolution setting a January 15th deadline for Iraq to get out of Kuwait. January 15th, 1991, deadline day, and Saddam did not budge.
Thousands of people took to the streets of Baghdad for an hour this morning in orchestrated demonstrations designed to send Saddam Hussein's message to Washington, that Iraqis are willing to fight and to die rather than give up Kuwait.
And back in Washington,
The mixed feelings within this country are reflected at the gates of the White House, with vigils and demonstrations now running around the clock. These voices of America ask the president to give peace more time.
but for Iraq, time had run out. In the early hours of January 17th, an air attack lit up Baghdad. George Bush's grand coalition had gone to war, starting with a nonstop aerial bombardment. That air war, and some of the most remarkable combat footage ever taken when the 20th century continues. When Allied airmen finally hit Iraq, they hit hard and they never let up. The strategists who planned the air campaign called it instant thunder. It started suddenly in the middle of the night, and for 6 weeks, a deluge of destruction from the sky was delivered to Baghdad.
Missile away!
To Iraq's hinterland, and finally to Saddam's forces in Kuwait. It was state-of-the-art warfare. Stealth bombers, laser-directed, video-guided, and heat-seeking bombs, cruise missiles, some of the weapons never before fired in anger.
2, 1, launch.
The bombardment of Iraqi forces continues around the clock. Before dawn, the USS Wisconsin launched missiles into southern Iraq.
The first target, Iraq's air defenses, radar and airfields. Next, command and communications facilities, military headquarters, phone networks, to decapitate Iraq's sprawling military complex. And that was only the start.
We are flying a total of about 2,000 air sorties of all types each day. More than 80% of all of those sorties have successfully engaged their target.
Saddam responded to the attacks with a Scud. Frequently an inaccurate, but often a deadly ground-to-ground missile.
U.S. intelligence can now confirm that there has been a Scud missile attack launched by Iraq on Tel Aviv.
The day after the air war started, Saddam launched one Scud at Saudi Arabia and, more significantly, 8 at Israel. 5 of the 8 Scuds hit Tel Aviv and Haifa, injuring 15 people and causing heavy property damage. But heeding U.S. requests, Israel did not retaliate against Saddam. But against the Allied bombardment, the Iraqis could only fire anti-aircraft weapons blindly without help from the destroyed radar. The Allied air superiority was overwhelming.
Showing videotapes of direct hit after direct hit on Iraqi aircraft shelters, General Norman Schwarzkopf attempted to paint a picture of the step-by-step dismantling of Iraq's ability to wage war.
The simple fact of the matter is that now, every time an Iraqi airplane takes off the ground, it's running away.
And many of them did run away to neutral Iran, where they were impounded. But Saddam persevered.
Saddam Hussein emerged from his office bunker in Baghdad this morning, alive and apparently well. His first message to the Iraqi people was classic Saddam, defiant, taunting. He called President Bush the Satan of the White House.
Iraq continued to launch Scuds, especially hoping that Israel would retaliate, which might cause the Arab allies of the U.S., including the Saudis, to leave the anti-Saddam coalition. Washington rushed 2 Patriot anti-missile batteries, manned by Americans, to Israel, and numerous Allied warplanes were sent on a game of hide-and-seek to try to locate and destroy Iraq's mobile Scud launchers.
U.S. aircraft have now flown a total of 2,100 combat missions over Iraq and Kuwait, many of them searching for the Scud missile launchers, which defense officials say is the chief remaining Iraqi threat.
American pilots raided Saddam's Scud missile sites today, attacking launch sites within range of Saudi Arabia.
And once we found it, we proceeded to attack it. Knowing what those things can do, it's good to take them out.
This U.S. Patriot missile battery knocked a Scud out of the sky this morning as it bore down on Saudi Arabia.
Allied efforts notwithstanding, the Scuds continued to fly. The Israelis were apprehensive that an incoming Scud might have a warhead with poison gas, as Saddam had repeatedly threatened.
So far, there have been 2 waves of missile attacks against Israel tonight.
The alarms went off. People donned gas masks. Civil defense emergency teams braced for the attack. Patriot missiles were fired into the sky. Not all the Scuds were hit, but even when they are, blazing debris falls to the earth. That was also the case last night. Several areas of Tel Aviv were badly hit. 1,000 homes were damaged. Close to 70 persons were injured. 2 were killed in the rubble of their home.
Over and over, the Israelis warned they were about to retaliate, but under relentless U.S. pressure, they never did.
I want to state here publicly how much I appreciated Israel's restraint from the outset, really from the very beginning of this crisis.
Despite Israeli anxiety and anger, Schwarzkopf downplayed the danger of the Scuds.
I, frankly, would be more afraid of standing out in a lightning storm in southern Georgia than I would be standing out in the streets of Riyadh when the Scuds are coming down. If it's going to hit you, it's going to hit you, but the percentages are so much less.
Another Saddam weapon, a handful of captured Allied airmen. In Baghdad, Saddam put them on TV to recite statements that had been written for them by the Iraqis.
I think our leaders and our people have wrongly attacked the peaceful people of Iraq.
Once again, Saddam's propaganda backfired. In trying to frighten Americans, he made them angrier. Saddam did score a major propaganda coup when U.S. airmen went after what the Pentagon said was a military command and communications center in Baghdad, but what they hit was an air raid shelter.
2 direct hits had drilled through at least 9 feet of reinforced concrete and turned what was supposed to be a safe place into a fire pit. The Iraqis say more than 500 people were trapped by the fires in a number of underground rooms. There were many women, many children.
Afterward, Washington insisted the building was a military facility and that the U.S. hadn't known that civilians were inside. The Iraqis insisted the building was only an air raid shelter. Years after the war, neither side had changed its story. Whatever propaganda victory Saddam achieved from that episode was nullified when Iraq conducted an environmental raid on the Persian Gulf. Saddam ordered that millions of gallons of oil from Kuwaiti wells be spilled into the delicate ecosystem of the Persian Gulf.
This is clearly an act of environmental terrorism.
There's no rationality to it. It looks desperate. It looks last gasp. It doesn't measure up to any military doctrine of any kind.
While Saddam thrashed about, the Allied coalition forces were making a major move designed to take the Iraqis totally by surprise when and if there was a ground attack.
While the Allied plan is, of course, a tightly held secret and subject to last-minute change, military analysts say the American superiority in the air and in maneuverability dictate a campaign that moves quickly and in several directions at once. Political considerations, the deeply felt American aversion to casualties, dictate a campaign that bypasses enemy strongholds whenever that is possible.
The plan was crafted by Schwarzkopf and backed by General Colin Powell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Our strategy to go after this army is very, very simple. First, we're going to cut it off, and then we're going to kill it.
Large U.S. and Allied ground units moved secretly from the eastern Saudi border with Kuwait, heavily fortified by the Iraqis, to the western Saudi border with Iraq, which was virtually undefended. At the same time, on Persian Gulf beaches, U.S. Marines publicly rehearsed for an amphibious landing in Kuwait.
Analysts say an amphibious assault, which the Marines are constantly rehearsing, would probably come on the heels of the Army's ground offensive and would be aimed at surrounding the large Iraqi reserve force now stationed several miles north of the Kuwait border.
A landing that never did take place. But they succeeded in keeping large numbers of Iraq's best troops, the feared Republican Guard, waiting at the shoreline, far from the real invasion that lay ahead. Western reporters unwittingly became part of the deception that the amphibious landing in Kuwait was coming. They were never told the operation was a decoy. Controlling the media was standard operating procedure in the Gulf War, unlike Vietnam, where reporters were almost totally free to go where they wished. In the Gulf, they were herded into groups or pools with military escorts who decided when and where they'd go.
Thus far, most of this war has been fought in the skies over Kuwait and Iraq. But there's another battleground, in the military briefing rooms and on TV screens around the world.
I don't have any information on that report.
I can't comment on that at this point.
I'd have to refer you to the Saudi.
Reports were rigorously censored and often delayed until they were out of date. Nonetheless, a handful of news people began sneaking to the Kuwaiti border on their own to find out what was really happening. This could be risky, as CBS News correspondent Bob Simon and his three-man crew discovered when they were captured by the Iraqis.
We just wanted to check out what was going on. We're checking out the other side of the customs post, no man's land, when the jeep that changed our lives showed up and took us away.
Away, ultimately, to Baghdad. They were jailed, harshly interrogated, beaten, and nearly starved before they were finally released at war's end. But the big news was still the unrelenting air war. The number of air sorties, combat and support, continued to climb. It would top 100,000 altogether before the fighting was over. Those days in Iraq, with all the bombing, just driving a truck across a bridge could be a life-threatening experience. as this driver discovered when he crossed a bridge just moments before it was blown up by the Allies.
Keep your eye on the crosshairs. I'm now going to show you a picture of the luckiest man in Iraq on this particular day. Right through the crosshairs. And now in his rearview mirror.
At the end of January, a diversion from the air war, the first ground clash between Iraqis and the coalition. 2 Iraqi divisions crossed the Saudi border and temporarily occupied the deserted border town of Khafji. But it didn't last long.
Arab forces blasted their way back into Khafji today with the help of U.S. Marine firepower. Iraqi casualties are reported to be heavy after 2 days of fighting.
11 U.S. Marines died in the Khafji battle. All 11, it was learned later, by friendly fire. They were the first Americans to die in Gulf ground combat. Back home, the polls reflected the initial success of the air war. President Bush's approval rating soared to an extraordinary 86%. Nonetheless, debate continued over the wisdom of launching a major ground offensive. Once again, demonstrators were on the march, particularly in Washington.
75,000 people turned out to oppose the war. Thousands more protested in San Francisco.
Along with protests against the war today, there were demonstrations in support of the American troops. Several hundred people rallied in Albany, New York, holding signs that included "Hate the war, not the troops," and several thousand turned out in Miami to salute the servicemen and women of Desert Storm.
Although Desert Storm was thousands of miles away, the constant threat of Iraqi terrorism made the war seem less remote in the U.S. Security was extra tight at airports around the country. Flights were delayed or canceled. The war even cast a shadow over the sports world.
Iraqi threats of terrorism have turned Super Bowl 25 into Super Security Bowl, with car searches, metal detectors, and lots of police. Everyone and everything will be checked.
The game was played without incident, and of course on TV, it was a big hit with the troops in Saudi Arabia. On February 22nd, Bush decided the time had come. He gave Saddam one more day to start pulling out of Kuwait or to face a ground attack. Instead, Saddam made a desperation move. He started torching all of Kuwait's oil fields.
U.S. military sources say that at least 190 wellheads and other oil facilities are blazing in Kuwait, touched off in an Iraqi scorched earth campaign to destroy the nation's oil industry and also to obscure the battlefield. There are reports that all of the more than 900 wellheads in Kuwait have been mined.
But for Saddam, all that burning oil was just a smokescreen to block out reality. On Sunday, February 24th, the ground invasion began. After those 6 weeks of air bombardment, the coalition ground forces jumped off, moving northward along a 300-mile front to settle the Gulf War once and for all. The climactic 100 hours when the 20th century returns. 0 hour, Sunday, February 24th. After months of suspense, then weeks of waiting, it was time for the huge Allied ground offensive to get underway. Time to see whether General Schwarzkopf's bold gamble would work.
From the war zone, late reports from all along the front lines indicate that the massive U.S.-led ground war offensive has begun to roll. We have on the telephone now, for how long we do not know, CBS reporter Bob McEwen, who is 1 mile from the border with Kuwait. Bob, tell us what you see and hear and what's going on there.
At 9 o'clock yesterday morning, there was bombardment from every direction, from a warship, presumably the Wisconsin and the Missouri out in the Gulf, from artillery and overhead from bombers. And under that cover, the tanks that had arrived from the west moved up along the sand wall, the 12-foot sand wall that's a mile from us along the border, and moved into position.
The full weight of the Allied ground forces fell at once on the Iraqis arrayed against them. And not even the Allied commanders had anticipated how devastating the attack would be.
The first day of the assault went farther and faster than anyone had expected. Behind a curtain of artillery fire, an endless line of Allied armor poured through the border fortifications and rolled into Kuwait with little resistance. In half a day, they reached all their first-day objectives. Just inside Kuwait, artillery fire struck the Iraqis' first line of defense, a row of bunkers, and the troops either fled or surrendered. Many were wounded.
The liberation of Kuwait is on course and on schedule. We have the initiative. We intend to keep it. We must guard against euphoria.
Here's how it went. On the far west, the 82nd U.S. Airborne Division and French forces sped 100 miles into Iraq to block any counterattack from the northwest.
All along the Western Front, resistance was light. Here, there were no U.S. casualties the first 24 hours.
To their right, the 101st Airborne Division drove all the way to the Euphrates River to cut off any Iraqi retreat by that route.
When we were here, we were 150 miles away from Baghdad, and there was nobody between us and Baghdad. If it had been our intention to take Iraq, if it had been our intention to destroy the country, if it had been our intention to overrun the country, we could have done it unopposed for all intents and purposes from this position at that time.
Further east, U.S., British, and other Allied units drove north, then east, to cut off and confront Iraq's elite Republican Guard units in northern Kuwait.
Operation's going well. We're very pleased with progress to date, but it is not yet over, so it'll continue till it is over.
And finally, near the Gulf Coast, U.S. Marines and Saudi units hit the most heavily fortified Iraqi positions head-on to clear the way to Kuwait City. Tanks pushed first through enemy sand barriers, and the Marines quickly followed against the best resistance Iraq could offer.
"10 hours into this ground offensive, more than 5,500 prisoners have been captured. And we received reports of many hundreds more north of our positions with white surrender flags. Friendly casualties have been extremely light."
The POWs, when we initially interrogated them, said that when the airstrikes hit these positions last night, their officers left and went north.
We've had a number of prisoners when they've come across. The first words that they give us are, you know, President Bush, yes, President Bush, we love him, Saddam, and they spit.
One group of Iraqis even gave themselves up to a TV reporter and his camera crew.
Why do they surrender? Because they say they are tired of war, tired of the American bombs, and because they're desperately hungry and thirsty.
But even as coalition forces were cutting through the Iraqi lines, Iraq still had Scuds to fire. And one of them hit a building housing a U.S. National Guard unit in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, killing 28 soldiers and wounding about 100 more. It was the worst Allied loss of the entire war.
The Americans inside never had a chance. Until last night, many people around Saudi Arabia thought themselves virtually Scud-proof. They believed the Patriot missile system was protection enough, but no Patriot was fired to intercept this Scud.
Less than a day after the ground attack began, Iraqis had begun pulling out of Kuwait City.
45 miles from the Kuwaiti capital, Saudi gunners opened up when Iraqis dug in along the coastal road, clearing the way for a convoy of Arab forces and U.S. Marines to barrel north into Kuwait City itself and beyond.
In 2 days, Kuwaiti resistance forces claimed control of the city. The day after, Kuwaiti, Saudi, and U.S. forces moved in.
From this day forward, history will record that Independence Day here in Kuwait, certainly here in Kuwait City, will be February the 26th, 1991. People are just jubilant that 7 months under Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi army is over and that life can get back to normal finally here in Kuwait.
As the capital was freed, U.S. Marines took back the embassy that America had been forced to abandon under siege back in December.
A giant helicopter hovered over the main embassy building, then dropped in the Marines and Special Forces, like the evacuation of Saigon, in reverse. Suddenly, the Marines have landed, and the situation is well in hand. On the streets and roads, people gave the V for Victory sign, waved the Kuwaiti flag, blew kisses, and everywhere the message was, God bless America, God bless George Bush, thank you for doing what you have done.
Inside Kuwait City, there was a sense of the suffering this nation has endured.
Never you saw such thing. Just these soldiers came to Kuwait, destroy everything you saw, destroy the men here.
They brought them over here in this place, and they just shot them and killed them.
At a local police station, a captured Iraqi captain admitted his army's atrocities.
Saddam. All of what has happened is because of that wicked and cunning Saddam.
Let me show you something now that's just a few yards beyond our camera. And this is right on the beach, a command bunker. Holes to fire out of here. Clips of 7.62 ammunition. Soviet-made. In here. A lot of this stuff is marked Jordan. Clip after clip. Fast feeding. The intention was to make what's out front of this command bunker a killing ground for Marines.
But the war wasn't over yet. Iraqis fleeing north from Kuwait City were unaware that Allied forces were cutting off the road north near the Iraqi city of Basra. It soon became a killing lane, a turkey shoot for Allied airmen.
Iraqis in headlong flight out of Kuwait choked the roads, becoming easy prey for U.S. aircraft. 2 A-10 pilots knocked out 23 tanks all by themselves.
There's just nothing like it. It's the biggest 4th of July show you've ever seen. And to see those tanks just boom, and more stuff just keeps spewing out of them, and the shells flying on the ground, and they just become white hot.
Ring Road number 4, leading into Kuwait City, is now a highway of destruction. A surreal scene, a roadway of shattered Iraqi armor and men. Here lies the remains of Saddam Hussein's military disaster. Nightmarish and macabre images line the roadway. Dead Iraqi soldiers killed in an air attack.
Frozen in time, how Iraqi soldiers fleeing in panic reacted as U.S. planes bombed and strafed with devastating force and accuracy. In this place of unspeakable sadness and desolation, scavengers are now relooting for themselves what the Iraqi soldiers had looted from Kuwait. The wreckage goes on for miles. Beside it, ammunition, unexploded bombs, and the bodies of dead soldiers who remain unburied. The fact that they fled with their weapons cost them their lives.
At the height of the advance, U.S. armored forces finally met up with 2 tank divisions of the Republican Guard. It was the biggest armored battle since World War II. But the state-of-the-art U.S. M1A tanks were better than Iraq's Soviet-made T-72s. Their guns could shoot farther, and they had air support and undamaged communications.
Oh, we got it! Oh, that blew the hell out of it!
The final score in tanks lost, Iraq 200, U.S. 0.
The Allied armies under General Norman Schwarzkopf's command descended on the remnants of Iraq's Republican Guards, trapped in a coffin corner with an uncrossable river at their back and the most powerful tank force in the history of warfare at their front.
The gates are closed. There is no way out of here. There is no way out of here.
The remaining Iraqi forces were trapped and helpless, packaged for destruction. But at 9 p.m., February 27th, President Bush announced unilaterally that the Gulf War was coming to an abrupt end.
I am pleased to announce that at midnight tonight, Eastern Standard Time, exactly 100 hours since ground operations commenced and 6 weeks since the start of Operation Desert Storm, all United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations.
The next day, Iraq accepted the ceasefire on the Allies' terms. Military commanders met in the southern Iraqi city of Safwan, controlled by the Allies, to work out the details.
But I'm not here to give them anything. I'm here to tell them exactly what we expect them to do.
Schwarzkopf's first priority, freeing the small number of U.S. POWs, including 2 women, in a prisoner exchange. He demanded and he got information on the thickets of Iraqi minefields. The Iraqis were forbidden to fly military planes, and then Schwarzkopf surprised the Iraqis by assuring them the coalition forces would leave their country as soon as possible.
Jubilant troops from the 82nd Airborne Division, among the first into Saudi Arabia, and tonight among the first to fly home.
Dismiss all with me and go home to our loved ones.
It's a great day to be a soldier. I'm proud of you. Your country's proud of you. The world's proud of you. And Godspeed on your trip home. And God bless America.
It looked like a total victory for the United States and its allies, the winners of the most one-sided war in modern times. Or was it just a desert mirage? Did President Bush let Saddam off the hook by ending the fighting just a little too soon? A look at the war's aftermath when the 20th century returns. America was swept up in a fever of euphoria and patriotism as the Gulf War ended and the troops came marching home. Euphoria, patriotism, and relief. Relief because the war was so surprisingly short and U.S. casualties so surprisingly low. Besides, a brutal dictator, a man easy to hate, had been brought up short. To many Americans, it was a good war. The country hadn't seen pictures like this since World War II. For a while, President Bush basked in the warmth of victory. His approval rating shot up to a record 91%.
I can report to the nation, aggression is defeated, the war is over.
On the wide boulevards, just a few blocks from the White House, 8,000 Desert Storm troops were moving out. And once again, it was General Norman Schwarzkopf who set the cadence, leading the way as far as the presidential box, where he spent the rest of the parade as cheerleader and spotter for a clearly delighted George Bush.
If it was in uniform today, it got hugged, kissed, saluted, and cheered, as the American military experienced an outpouring of affection not witnessed here in 45 years.
But gradually, the cheering stopped. A lot of people began taking a second look at the way the war had been run. And when they did, some tarnish appeared on the decorations of our top brass. Because back in the Gulf, Saddam was still in power. And half his Republican Guard units were still there.
The written mission for Schwarzkopf was to destroy the Republican Guard, and they did not do that. About 50% of the Republican Guard was able to escape across the Euphrates River.
And then those Iraqi Guard units immediately went to work, helping Saddam put down uprisings by Iraq's Kurds and Shiite Muslims, minority groups hostile to the Saddam regime. Saddam's troops got air support from helicopters. At the ceasefire talks, lacking guidance from Washington, Schwarzkopf had permitted the Iraqis to fly them.
The Iraqis asked about the use of helicopters, and he saw no reason why the Iraqis couldn't use helicopters, assuming that they would be for logistic and administrative purposes.
But instead they used their choppers to shoot at the Shiites. President Bush watched, undecided what to do. He wanted the Iraqis to overthrow Saddam, but he didn't want U.S. forces to help. Adding to the dilemma, the growing numbers of Shiite and Kurd refugees from the fighting. In the past, Saddam had attacked refugees like these with napalm and poison gas.
With each passing hour now, the plight of the growing hordes of refugees from the Iraq War seems to grow worse.
We're helping out, and we're going to continue to help these refugees. But I do not want one single soldier or airman shoved into a civil war in Iraq that's been going on for ages, and I'm not going to have that.
Saddam Hussein today announced what is now obvious, that government forces have put down the uprisings by both the Kurds in the north and the Shiites in the south.
Ultimately, all the U.S. could do was order no-fly zones in northern and southern Iraq to keep Iraqi planes and helicopters from massacring the refugees. Despite his defeat, Saddam Hussein seemed somehow unpersuaded. In 1993, the Iraqis conducted a small raid into Kuwait to recover military hardware they had abandoned in the war. They deployed missile batteries in areas the Allies had put off limits. So just before stepping down from the presidency, George Bush struck again.
President Bush has fired a powerful parting shot at Saddam Hussein. It was a nighttime laser lights in the sky bombing strike against military targets in southern Iraq.
The raiders destroyed anti-aircraft missiles and air defenses and returned without casualties. But Saddam, as usual, was undeterred. June 1993. President Clinton ordered the firing of missiles at Iraq on learning that Saddam had tried to assassinate George Bush when the former president visited Kuwait.
I ordered our forces to launch a cruise missile attack on the Iraqi Intelligence Service's principal command and control facility in Baghdad. These actions were directed against the Iraqi government, which was responsible for the assassination plot. Saddam Hussein has demonstrated repeatedly that he will resort to terrorism or aggression if left unchecked.
And by October 1994, Saddam was even threatening Kuwait again.
Saddam Hussein has moved the Republican Guard Division to within 20 miles of the Kuwaiti border, the most threatening Iraqi troop movement since the end of the Persian Gulf War.
We are watching it very closely. We are taking the necessary steps as a precaution to deal with this issue.
The U.S. began to build up its Gulf forces once again, and the Iraqis backed down. But Saddam was still the man in charge. Why? How had the Allied coalition let Saddam off the hook?
Colin Powell was the one that recommended that the war come to an end. And he made that judgment, not on military grounds, but he made it on political grounds, to wit, the pictures of the highway of death. Colin Powell saw this as tarnishing the image of the United States and the U.S. military and sending a message that the Americans were slaughtering hopeless Arabs.
But General Powell disputes that.
I think to have allowed the war to continue another 12 hours or 24 hours would have killed some more Iraqis, perhaps killed some more Americans, but would not have fundamentally changed the situation on the ground. We did achieve the military objectives we set out for ourselves, and those objectives were very clearly matched to political objectives, which were also achieved.
Despite the victory, a vague sense of unease worried the administration in the aftermath of the war.
You know, to be very honest with you, I haven't yet felt this wonderfully euphoric feeling that many of the American people feel. I think it's that I want to see an end. And now we have Saddam Hussein still there, the man that wreaked this havoc upon his neighbors.
I think the president made the correct decision, a courageous decision, and I think history will show it was absolutely the right decision.
Maybe so, but others continue to believe that Operation Desert Storm was a hollow victory. The United States had sent 291 young men and women to their deaths, and had spent billions of dollars to liberate Kuwait. But Saddam Hussein's Iraq remained a threat to the region and, in fact, to the world. Some dividends from the Gulf War when the 20th century returns. Yasser Arafat, head of the Palestine Liberation Organization, had backed Iraq because of Saddam's enmity toward Israel. And Jordan's King Hussein had tilted toward Iraq, mainly because most of his subjects are Palestinians. Embarrassed and weakened at war's end, both men took a giant step toward moderation and signed peace accords with Israel, a slap in the face to Saddam and a major step toward reducing tension in the region. But the biggest effect of the Gulf War may have been on the American people and their attitude toward their armed forces. While routing Saddam Hussein, the U.S. forces in Desert Storm also restored a confidence in their military that had been missing for so many Americans for years after Vietnam. 500,000 highly trained U.S. servicemen and women, all volunteers, went to the Persian Gulf, and for the first time since World War II, they came home heroes. I'm Mike Wallace, and this is the 20th century.
If you enjoyed this look into our historic past, you'll be happy to know that the History Channel has arrived. Call your cable company and ask them to carry the History Channel, where history comes alive. And now, Law and Order is next on A&E.